The reflection that lingered. It started subtly, the way these things often do. I'd moved into the old apartment building a month prior, charmed by the high ceilings and the ridiculously low rent for the city. There was an antique mirror left in the hallway by the previous tenant, tall, ornate, with dark, heavy wood framing slightly foxed glass. I didn't think much of it, just another piece of vintage character. The first time I noticed something was off, I blamed exhaustion. I'd come home late, flicked on the dim hallway light, and caught my reflection as I passed. For a fraction of a second, it seemed like my reflection lingered, its head still turned towards the door even after I had faced forward. I blinked, shook my head, and saw only my tired face staring back. Too much screen time, I thought. But it kept happening. Little inconsistencies. A flicker at the edge of my vision when I glanced at the mirror. The feeling, faint but persistent, that the eyes in the reflection weren't quite looking at me, but just past me. My pulse would give a little kick, a cold wave washing briefly over my skin before I rationalized it away. Old glass warps images. The lighting in the hall was terrible. I was stressed. The rationalizations grew thinner as the incidents became stranger. One evening, I was locking my door, fumbling with my keys. I glanced up at the mirror and froze. My reflection was perfectly still, keys already in its pocket, posture relaxed. But my hands were still raised, mid-fumble. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, oppressive silence. I snatched my hand back, breath catching in my throat. When I dared to look again, the reflection matched me perfectly, wide-eyed and pale. Sleep started to evade me. The hallway outside my bedroom door felt charged, heavy. I'd lie awake, listening to the building's normal groans, but imagining faint whispers or the soft scuff of movement near the mirror. My mouth would go dry, and a tremor would start in my hands. I began avoiding the hallway mirror entirely, taking a longer route through the living room to get to the kitchen, my gaze fixed firmly away from that corner. One night, curiosity mixed with a desperate need for proof overcame my fear. It was late, around 2 a.m. The building was utterly silent. Holding my phone, hands slick with sweat, I crept into the hallway and stood before the mirror. My reflection stared back, a tense silhouette in the gloom. I raised my phone slowly, angling it to take a picture. Through the screen, I saw it. My reflection smiled. It wasn't my smile. Mine was a nervous, tight-lipped line. The reflection's smile was wide, slow, unnatural, stretching just a little too far. It held no warmth, only a chilling, knowing emptiness. I felt the blood drain from my face. My finger spasmed on the capture button. The flash illuminated the hallway for a blinding second. I scrambled back, heart pounding so hard I felt nauseous. I looked at the photo on my phone with trembling fingers. It showed only me, wide-eyed with terror, no smile in sight. But I knew what I'd seen. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was real. I considered getting rid of the mirror, smashing it even. But a paralyzing fear stopped me. What if breaking it made things worse? What if it wasn't just the mirror? The feeling of being watched intensified. It followed me into my apartment. Sometimes, turning quickly, I'd catch a fleeting distortion in the reflective surface of my dark TV screen or a window pane, a shape that wasn't quite mine, vanishing instantly. The air in my apartment grew heavy, static-filled. I stopped inviting friends over, terrified they might notice something, or worse, that it might interact with them. My isolation grew, feeding the fear. I started leaving the hallway light off entirely, preferring the deep shadows to the potential horror revealed in the glass. Last night was the worst. I woke up abruptly, heart racing, drenched in cold sweat. No sound had woken me, just a crushing sense of presence. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that something was standing just outside my bedroom door. I lay frozen, barely breathing, listening. Silence. A thick, waiting silence. Then, a faint, slow scrape echoed from the hallway. Like fingernails dragging lightly across wood. My blood ran cold. It sounded like it was coming from the direction of the mirror. I didn't move until dawn crept through the blinds, painting pale stripes across my wall. The scraping had stopped hours ago, but the terror hadn't faded. I hadn't left my bedroom yet. The door remains closed. I know I have to open it eventually. I have to walk down that hallway. But I'm terrified of what I'll see when I pass that mirror. Will the reflection be waiting? Will it smile again? Or will it show me something else entirely, something that has finally decided to step out of the glass? The silence from the hallway feels different this morning. It feels patient. And I think, whatever is in that mirror, it knows I'm finally looking. The knocking upstairs. The first time I heard it, I assumed it was the pipes. This old building groaned and sighed like a weary giant, especially at night. It was a faint, rhythmic thump-thump, thump-thump coming from the ceiling above my bedroom. Probably just the heating kicking in, I told myself, rolling over and pulling the pillow tighter around my ears. I'd moved into the apartment 2 months ago. It wasn't luxurious, but the rent was affordable, and the location was perfect. The only real quirk was the apartment directly above mine, Unit 4B. It had been vacant since long before I arrived. The landlord, a gruff man named Mr. Henderson, had mentioned it offhandedly when I signed the lease. Needs a lot of work, he'd grumbled. Been empty ages. That first night, the thumping faded quickly. But the next night, it returned, around the same time, just after 2 a.m. Thump thump, thump thump. A little louder this time. Definitely not the pipes. It sounded like footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pacing footsteps right over my head. My heart gave a nervous flutter. Maybe Mr. Henderson had finally rented it out. Or perhaps maintenance was doing late-night work. I tried to ignore it, telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. The following day, I caught Mr. Henderson near the mailboxes. "Hey," I started casually, "did someone finally move into 4B?" He gave me a strange look, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. "Unit 4B? No. Still empty as a drum." "Why?" A chill snaked down my spine. "Oh, no reason," I mumbled. "Thought I heard someone moving around up there last night." He just grunted. "Old building. Sounds travel weird." But his eyes held a flicker of something I couldn't quite read before he turned away. That night, the footsteps were back, clearer than ever. Thump. Pause. Thump. Pause. Heavy, like someone wearing worn-out boots was walking back and forth across a bare wooden floor directly above my bed. My throat tightened. My palms grew damp. If the apartment was empty, who was walking? Sleep became a battle. I'd lie awake, tense, waiting for the 2 a.m. footfalls. My rational mind screamed it was impossible, maybe sound carrying from another adjacent apartment, or even from outside. But the sound was distinctly above me. The ceiling plaster seemed to vibrate faintly with each step. Driven by a mix of fear and frustration, I decided I needed proof. One night, as the thudding began, I grabbed my phone, heart pounding against my ribs. My hands trembled as I hit record, holding the phone up towards the ceiling. I captured several minutes of the slow, rhythmic pacing. The next morning, bleary-eyed, I played the recording back. My stomach dropped. All the phone had picked up was a low, almost inaudible static hiss. There were no footsteps, no thuds, just a faint, persistent hum like wind blowing over an open microphone. It was as if the sound existed only for my ears. Was I losing my mind? Was stress making me hallucinate? I tried talking to a neighbor down the hall, an older woman named Mrs. Gable. When I vaguely mentioned strange noises from upstairs, her friendly expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, this old place makes all sorts of sounds, dearie," she said, her voice a little too bright. Best not to pay them any mind. She changed the subject quickly, leaving me feeling more isolated than ever. The footsteps began to change. Sometimes they sounded frantic, hurried. Other times, impossibly slow, dragging. One night, I heard a different noise, a soft, rhythmic tap-tap-tapping directly above my head. Not footsteps this time. Like someone was patiently knocking on the floorboards. That was the final straw. I couldn't live like this. The next afternoon, fueled by sleeplessness and dread, I climbed the stairs to the 4th floor. The hallway up there was dimmer, dust motes dancing in the weak light filtering through a grimy window at the far end. The air felt heavy, stale. I reached the door to 4B. It looked older than the others, the paint peeling, the wood slightly warped. Hesitantly, I tried the knob. Locked. I pressed my ear against the cool wood, listening intently. Silence. Utter, complete silence from within. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of being listened to. Defeated, I went back downstairs. But that night, the moment 2 a.m. rolled around, the noise returned. Not footsteps. Not tapping. This time, it was a slow, heavy scrape. Like a piece of furniture being dragged laboriously across the floor above me. Scrape, pause, scrape. My breath hitched. Every muscle in my body tensed. I lay paralyzed, sweat beading on my forehead, listening to that awful sound echo from the empty apartment. It went on for nearly an hour before finally fading into the oppressive silence. I didn't sleep. As soon as the sun rose, I started packing. I didn't care about the lease, I couldn't stay another night. As I carried boxes down to my car, I avoided looking up at the window of 4B. I found a new place across town. It's modern, sterile, and quiet. Mostly quiet. Sometimes, late at night, when the building settles and the city outside goes still, I think I hear it. Faintly. Almost imperceptibly. A soft thump-thump from the apartment above. There is someone living above me here. I know there is. But sometimes, when I hear that sound, I can't help but glance at my ceiling, my heart pounding, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. And I wonder, did the sound follow me? Or is it just the memory, echoing in the silence? The rational part of me knows it must be the new neighbors. But the part of me that lived below Unit 4B isn't so sure. And that uncertainty is a chill that never quite leaves. The figurine on the mantelpiece. It came with the house. Tucked away on the highest shelf of a dusty built-in bookcase in the study, almost hidden from view. It was a small, ceramic figurine of a jester, oddly proportioned, with a painted-on smile that seemed just a fraction too wide, too fixed. Its colors were faded, chipped in places, giving it a worn, ancient look. I almost left it, but something made me take it down, dust it off, and place it on the mantelpiece in the living room. It felt like it belonged there, a silent observer. My name is Alex, and I just bought my first house, an older place, full of creaks and drafts, but mine. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of unpacking and settling in. I barely noticed the jester figurine amidst the chaos. The first time I felt something was wrong was subtle. I was certain I'd placed the jester facing slightly towards the window. Yet, when I came down one morning, it was facing directly into the room, its painted eyes seeming to stare straight ahead. Must have bumped the mantelpiece, I thought, adjusting it back. Or maybe I just remembered wrong. But it happened again a few days later. This time, it was tilted slightly, leaning almost imperceptibly to the left. Again, I rationalized. Vibrations from passing traffic. The house settling. My own clumsiness. Still, a faint prickle of unease traced its way up my spine. The smile seemed wider that day. I started paying closer attention. I made a point of noting its exact position before leaving for work. One evening, I returned home to find it hadn't just shifted slightly, it was positioned at the opposite end of the mantelpiece. My heart gave a hard thump. There was no way vibrations could have moved it that far. The mantel was solid wood, level. My mind raced for explanations. Could there have been a minor tremor I didn't feel? Was I sleepwalking? The thought made me feel cold. I tried asking my neighbor if they'd felt any earthquakes, feeling foolish even as I asked. They hadn't. That night, sleep was difficult. The living room felt different, charged. I kept imagining those painted eyes watching me from the mantelpiece, the fixed smile seeming to mock my growing fear. I got up and closed the living room door, something I never usually did, but the feeling of being observed persisted even through the wood. I decided to conduct a small experiment. I took a pencil and made tiny, almost invisible marks on the mantelpiece, precisely outlining the figurine's base. Now I'll know for sure, I thought, a nervous knot tightening in my stomach. For 2 days, nothing happened. The gesture remained perfectly within its pencil-drawn boundary. I started to relax, telling myself I'd been letting the old house and my imagination get the better of me. On the third morning, I walked into the living room, coffee in hand, and froze. The gesture was sitting squarely outside the pencil marks, about an inch to the right. The marks themselves were undisturbed. It hadn't slid, it had been lifted and replaced. My coffee cup trembled in my hand, rattling against the saucer. There was no logical explanation. I lived alone. The doors and windows had been locked. Panic began to set in. My breathing grew shallow. I felt watched constantly. The figurine's presence dominated the room. Its painted smile seemed to stretch, its eyes seemed to follow me as I moved. I started avoiding the living room, spending more time in the kitchen or my bedroom, but the house felt smaller, the walls closing in. I tried setting up my phone to record the mantelpiece overnight. I propped it up carefully, pressed record, and went to bed, though sleep was impossible. I lay awake for hours, listening to every creak, every groan of the old house, imagining movement in the room next door. In the morning, I rushed to check the recording. My phone screen displayed an error message, recording failed due to an unknown error. I tried again the next night. This time, the recording worked, but it showed nothing but hours of the still, silent living room. The figurine hadn't moved an inch on camera. Yet, when I looked at the mantelpiece itself, the gesture was positioned just slightly differently than it had been when I started the recording. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but I knew. It was as if it knew when it was being watched electronically. The dread became suffocating. The gesture wasn't just moving, it felt aware. Its presence was heavy, oppressive. One afternoon, I came home from grocery shopping to find it wasn't on the mantelpiece at all. My blood ran cold. Frantically, I searched the living room, my heart pounding. I found it sitting on the armchair opposite the fireplace, facing the mantel, as if it had been admiring the empty space where it usually sat. That was it. I couldn't stand it anymore. With trembling hands, I picked up the figurine. It felt strangely cold to the touch, heavier than it looked. I didn't want to smash it, the thought filled me with a superstitious horror, but I couldn't keep it in the house. I found an old wooden box in the attic, placed the gesture inside, filled the empty space with packing peanuts, and sealed the box tightly with tape. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I carried the box out to the detached garage at the back of the property. I shoved it onto a high shelf, behind stacks of old paint cans and forgotten tools. Out of sight, out of mind. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The house felt lighter, the oppressive atmosphere lessened. The living room seemed normal again. It lasted for 3 days. This morning, I went to make coffee. As I waited for it to brew, I glanced towards the living room. My heart stopped. Sitting squarely in the middle of the mantelpiece, facing directly into the room, was the jester figurine. Its painted smile seemed wider, more triumphant than ever before. The box in the garage is still sealed. I checked. The doors were locked. The windows are secure. There's no way it could be back here. But it is. And this time, I have the distinct, chilling feeling that it's not just watching anymore. It's waiting. Continuing the story. The lake water closed over the phones, swallowing the Nokia and the impossible rotary dial without a ripple. For weeks, a fragile peace settled over me. I moved apartments, changed my number, and meticulously avoided any mention of Marshall Street or Cedar Lake Road. I told myself the connection was broken, the crossed signals silenced. But the silence itself became unnerving. It felt heavy, watchful. The phantom ringing persisted, usually late at night, a ghost echo in my ears. And the migrating phones, that didn't stop. My new smartphone, sleek and modern, would somehow find its way from the kitchen counter to my nightstand by morning, screen dark but feeling strangely aware. Then, the bleed-through started. It began subtly. Static bursts from my laptop speakers when no audio was playing. A flicker on the smart TV screen momentarily resolving into what looked like old-fashioned scrolling text, too fast to read. My digital alarm clock resetting itself to 3:47 a.m., the time of that first, impossible call. I tried to rationalize it: faulty wiring, software glitches, atmospheric interference. But the feeling, that cold dread from the storage unit, returned. The feeling that the lines weren't just crossed, they were frayed, leaking. One evening, working late on a report, my computer speakers crackled. Not just static this time, but voices. Faint, overlapping, the same muffled quality as the calls on the Nokia. Repeat, the frequency is unstable. Can't hold the lock. Message received, partial. 14-27-8, my old gym locker combination. Spoken amidst the digital noise. Need more time. October 2nd. My blood ran cold. They weren't gone. They hadn't needed the phones. The signal, whatever it was broader now, bleeding into the digital world. Driven by a mix of terror and morbid curiosity, I started searching online. Vague search terms at first: static voices, phantom calls, numbers appearing. Then, more specific: strange calls, unknown number, messages different times. That's when I found it. A small, obscure online forum dedicated to unexplained communication phenomena. Buried deep in a thread from 6 months ago was a post. User, SignalWatcher88. Subject, anyone else hearing things? Been getting weird static bursts through my speakers late at night. Sometimes voices, too faint to make out. Last night, clear as day, heard a string of numbers, 14-27-8. Means nothing to me. Anyone else? My breath hitched. Below it, replies. User, Echo Seeker, yes. Heard the same numbers. Thought I was going crazy. Happened during a weird power flicker. User, Timeslip_Traveler, got a voicemail last week. Pure static, but the caller ID showed my own number. Timestamp was for next Tuesday. User, Static Listener, keep hearing, October 2nd. Whispered between static on shortwave radio. Freaking me out. There were dozens more. People from different cities, different countries, all reporting variations of the same phenomena. Static, voices, impossible knowledge of personal details, references to time distortion, the recurring numbers, the date. The thread had gone quiet 2 months ago, the last post simply reading, "They're getting louder." The phones weren't the source, they were just receivers. The signal was the phenomenon, and it was spreading, finding new pathways through our interconnected world. Last night, it escalated again. My smart speaker, which I keep unplugged most of the time now, suddenly powered on. Its light pulsed blue, like the old Nokia screen. Then, a voice, perfectly clear, no static, the same female voice from the calls, filled my apartment. "The intersection is unstable," it said calmly. "Convergence point approaching." October 2nd. You were warned. You understand now, don't you? Before I could react, it spoke one more word, a word that froze the marrow in my bones. It spoke my new, unlisted phone number. Then it went silent. I'm writing this down, putting it out there, because the forum is gone now. Wiped clean. And I think I know why. The signal isn't just crossing lines anymore, it's consolidating. The voices aren't just echoes, they're focusing. Whatever is supposed to happen on October 2nd, 2024, whatever convergence they spoke of, it's getting closer. The phones, the speakers, the screens, they're just conduits. Maybe the original calls weren't just to me, maybe they were tests, attempts to lock onto anyone who would listen. And now? Now the signal doesn't need an invitation. Listen closely. Can you hear that low hum behind your screen right now? That faint crackle in your headphones? Is your clock showing the right time? The lines are open. The signals are crossing. And they know your number too. The wallpaper man. It started subtly, the way these things always seem to. I'd bought the old Victorian house for a song, knowing it needed work. My first big project was the upstairs nursery, peeling away layers of faded, decades-old wallpaper. Beneath a layer patterned with jaunty, slightly creepy cartoon animals, I found it, a dense, intricate floral design in muted greens and golds. It was beautiful, in a way, but strangely dizzying to look at. I decided to live with it for a few days while I prepped the rest of the room. That's when I first noticed something odd. I'd be sanding the window frame, glance over, and swear a particular cluster of leaves in the pattern was slightly different than it had been an hour before. A curl seemed tighter, a bloom slightly more open. Too much paint fume inhalation, I muttered, shaking my head. Old houses play tricks on your eyes. But it kept happening. The pattern seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. I started taking photos with my phone each morning and evening, comparing them side by side. My stomach clenched. It wasn't my imagination. Tiny, almost imperceptible changes were occurring. A tendril here, a petal there, the pattern was subtly rearranging itself. Then, the shape began to emerge. Within the dense foliage of the design, across one specific section of the wall near the closet, the negative space between the leaves and stems started looking wrong. Less random. Over several days, documented by my increasingly frantic photo-taking, this negative space coalesced. It formed a silhouette. Tall, thin, undeniably human-shaped, embedded within the pattern itself. It had no features, just an outline against the floral background, like a shadow woven into the fabric of the paper. But the posture felt wrong. Too stiff, slightly hunched, with arms held oddly at its sides. And the worst part? Its head was always turned towards wherever I was in the room. I stopped sleeping well. Every creak of the old house sounded like movement from that room. I started keeping the nursery door closed, but I felt drawn to it. I had to check the photos each day, had to see how he had changed. The figure within the pattern grew marginally clearer, the lines sharper. Sometimes, standing near the wall, I thought I heard a faint rustling, like dry paper shifting, even when there was no draft. Friends told me I was stressed, letting the renovation get to me. Just rip it down already, my sister advised over the phone. I knew she was right. This obsession was unhealthy. One Saturday morning, armed with a steamer and scraper, I confronted the wall. The air in the room felt thick, heavy. The silence pressed in. As I aimed the steamer at the section with the figure, the rustling sound returned, louder this time, seeming to come from behind the paper. My hand trembled as I slid the scraper beneath the first loosened edge. The old paper peeled away reluctantly, revealing the pale, aged plaster underneath. I worked faster, tearing strips down, my heart pounding. I focused on the figure, scraping away the leaves and stems that formed its outline. As the last piece of the figure's head came away, the rustling stopped abruptly. I stepped back, breathing heavily, staring at the bare plaster where the shape had been. There was nothing there. No stain, no hidden drawing, no mark whatsoever. Just plain, old plaster. Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. It had just been the pattern, a trick of the eye, pareidolia fueled by stress and old wallpaper. I spent the rest of the weekend prepping and painting the room a cheerful, neutral beige. No more patterns. The house felt lighter afterwards. I slept better. The nursery, freshly painted, felt like just another room. Until last night. I was reading in the living room downstairs. The house was quiet. Then, I heard it. Faint, but unmistakable. A dry, papery rustling sound. It wasn't coming from the nursery upstairs. It was coming from the wall behind my armchair. The living room wallpaper is a simple stripe pattern, one I hadn't planned on changing anytime soon. I haven't moved from this spot for an hour. The rustling hasn't stopped. And I can't shake the feeling that if I look closely enough at the stripes on the wall beside me, really focus on the space between them, I might start to see a familiar, tall, thin silhouette taking shape. Maybe tearing the paper down didn't get rid of him. Maybe it just let him move. Check your walls. Especially the ones with patterns. Do they always look exactly the same? My reflection is lagging. It started about 2 weeks ago, so small I barely registered it. I was video calling my sister, holding my phone up. As I nodded, my reflection on the small preview screen in the corner seemed to nod back a fraction of a second too late. Just a tiny lag. Bad connection, I thought, and didn't give it another thought. But then it happened again a few days later while I was checking my hair using my phone camera as a mirror. I turned my head quickly, and the image on the screen followed, but distinctly after I'd already stopped moving. It wasn't a jerky lag like a bad frame rate, it was smooth, just delayed. Like watching myself on a satellite feed with a noticeable transmission delay. I tried restarting my phone, checking for updates, clearing the cache. Nothing changed. The delay remained, subtle but consistent. It was only a fraction of a second, maybe half a second at most, but once I'd noticed it, I couldn't unnotice it. Then it started happening on other screens. My laptop webcam during work meetings, my digital self would react just slightly behind my real self. Even the dark screen of the TV when it was off, if I moved quickly in front of it, the faint reflection mimicking my movement felt sluggish, trailing behind reality. I convinced myself it was eye strain or maybe some weird neurological quirk brought on by too much screen time. I booked an eye test, came back fine. I tried using my partner's phone and laptop, their reflections were perfectly synced. It was only my reflection, only on my devices. The delay started getting slightly longer. Maybe 3/4 of a second now. It was incredibly disconcerting. I'd smile, and my reflection would hold a neutral expression for that split second before its own smile bloomed. It felt like watching someone else trying to mimic me poorly. Last night, the rationalization stopped working. I was washing dishes, looking out the dark kitchen window. The glass acted like a mirror, reflecting the dimly lit room behind me. I reached up to scratch my head. In the dark reflection, the shadowy arm didn't move with mine. For a full second, maybe two, my reflection stayed perfectly still, hand down by its side, before suddenly jerking its arm up to mimic my scratch. My heart hammered against my ribs. That wasn't lag. That was independent action followed by a correction. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking. I avoided all reflective surfaces for the rest of the evening. No phone camera, no laptop screen, no dark windows. This morning, I had to face it. I needed to shave. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, the brightly lit, undeniable mirror. I took a deep breath and looked. My reflection looked back. Normal. Phew. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my right hand. My reflection raised its left hand. No. Wait. That's how mirrors work. Of course. Relief, sharp and sudden. I almost laughed at my own paranoia. I lowered my hand. My reflection's hand stayed up for a beat, 2 beats, then slowly, smoothly lowered itself. Not mirroring me. Not lagging. Just, doing its own thing, a second behind. I stared into its eyes, my eyes. They looked back, steady. I tried a small smile. The reflection held my gaze, expressionless. Then, after a long, unnerving pause, its lips curled into a smile that wasn't quite my own. It was wider. A little too wide. I haven't looked in a mirror since. I've covered the bathroom mirror with a towel. My phone is screen down. My laptop is closed. But the problem is, reflections are everywhere. A polished countertop. A spoon. A puddle outside. Sunglasses. Someone else's eyes. How can you avoid seeing yourself? I keep catching glimpses. Quick, darting movements in shiny surfaces that don't match my own. A reflection turning its head when I'm looking straight ahead. A flicker of that too wide smile in the toaster oven door. It's getting faster at correcting itself, the delay shortening again. But the movements before the correction are becoming more pronounced. More independent. Please, do me a favor. Try it now. Look at your own reflection. Maybe on your phone screen, maybe a dark window. Move quickly. Does it follow instantly? Are you sure? Watch it for a little while. Keep watching. Is it just lagging? Or is it learning? The 1147 laugh. The story. Found on a discarded company laptop, file name, final_report_j_martinez.txt. The laugh cut through the silence of the empty mall at 11:47 p.m. high-pitched, sharp, and utterly wrong. I froze mid-step, my flashlight beam locked on the cracked tile floor. That sound didn't belong here. Not in this dead wing of the Riverside Mall, scheduled for demolition next month. Not when I was the only soul supposed to be within a quarter mile of this section. I'm Jim Martinez, night security. Been here 8 years. Normally, I patrol the active East Wing, the renovated part with the multiplex and chain restaurants still pulling crowds. But tonight, management wanted one last sweep of the abandoned West Wing before the construction crews started prep work tomorrow. The West Wing's been sealed for 3 years. Every storefront is shuttered, windows covered in thick plastic sheets. The air hangs heavy, tasting of dust and decay. My footsteps echoed unnervingly off the bare walls where bright advertisements used to hang. The only light dripped from the emergency exit signs, painting everything in a dim, blood-red glow. Then I heard it again. A woman's laugh, closer this time. It seemed to come from inside Forever Young, an old clothing store about 30 feet ahead. My scalp prickled. The fine hairs on my arms stood straight up. This wasn't the echo of teenagers messing around. This laugh felt real. Too real for a building sealed tighter than a drum. I'd checked every entrance myself at the start of my shift, chained, padlocked, secure. My flashlight beam hit the store's facade. The heavy steel security gate was pulled down tight, an impenetrable mesh. The display windows behind it were covered in thick black plastic, taped securely around every edge. No gaps. No way in. Another laugh, closer still. My throat tightened. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill in the air. I forced myself forward, the rubber soles of my boots squeaking on the dusty floor. Security. I called out, proud my voice held steady. This is a restricted area. Identify yourself. The laughter stopped. Abruptly. The silence that fell was absolute, broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart. I moved closer to the storefront, scanning the gate, the plastic sheeting. Everything intact. Undisturbed. But as I got nearer, I noticed something strange about the darkness behind the plastic. It seemed deeper. More absolute than mere shadow. A soft thud against the metal gate made me jump back. Then another, and another. Like someone tapping their fingers, one by one, against the steel links. The laughter started again. Not sharp this time. Low. Gurgling. Utterly wrong. I fumbled for the radio on my belt. Static crackled as I keyed the mic control. This is Martinez in the West Wing. I have a possible what? Laughing ghost. That would earn me desk duty and endless jokes. The tapping continued, moving slowly across the gate from left to right. Then a sound like fingernails dragging across metal sent ice down my spine. Martinez, repeat, breaking up. The radio squawked, more static than voice, then died completely. The plastic sheeting behind the gate bulged outward. Just slightly at first, then more, like something unseen was pressing against it from the inside. Jim. The whisper was faint, wet, and seemed to come from right behind the bulging plastic. My name. How did it know my name? My name tag, my rational mind screamed, but the thought brought zero comfort. The bulge grew larger, the black plastic stretching impossibly thin, taking on a disturbing shape, like a face pushing through a membrane. I could almost make out features, the suggestion of eyes, a nose, a mouth stretched wide in a horrifying grin. The material grew thinner, becoming almost transparent. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. My boots pounded the tiles as I sprinted back the way I came. The laughter erupted again, echoing off the walls, seeming to come from everywhere at once. The red exit signs pulsed like warnings. I rounded a corner, adrenaline surging, and slammed into a discarded display rack, pain shooting through my side. My flashlight flew from my hand, skittering across the floor before its beam died. Cursing, I scrambled up. The laughter was closer now. And footsteps. Running footsteps, impossibly fast, coming up behind me. The exit door, 50 feet away, its red sign burning in the darkness. I pushed myself harder than I ever thought possible. 30 feet. 20. 10. Something cold brushed the back of my neck, like fingers, but too long, too cold. I hit the crash bar with both hands, bursting out into the blessedly cool night air. I didn't stop running until I reached the security office in the East Wing, slamming the door behind me, collapsing into my chair, shaking uncontrollably. I told the overnight supervisor I'd chased off some trespassers. He just noted it in the log. I quit the next morning. Found a new job within a week, daytime security, at a library. Quiet. Safe. No abandoned wings. The demolition crew started work on schedule. I drove past the mall once during the day, watching them tear down the West Wing piece by piece. But I never went back at night. Never wanted to risk hearing that laugh echo through empty halls again. But sometimes, when I'm alone, especially when it's dark and quiet, I hear it. That high, sharp laugh. And I wonder, if I'd stayed just a few seconds longer, would I have seen the face behind the plastic? Would I have learned why it knew my name? I write this now as a warning. If you work security, if you explore abandoned places, if you ever find yourself alone where you shouldn't be, listen carefully. If you hear laughter where there should only be silence, don't investigate. Don't call out. Don't shine your light into the darkness. Run. Run as fast as you can, and don't look back. Because some things that laugh in the dark, they learn your name. And they are very, very patient. They might just be waiting for you to turn around. Okay, everyone, gather round. It's the storyteller here, ready to spin a tale for you. I see you've settled in, maybe getting ready for sleep. Perfect. Before we dive deep, if you enjoy these stories, a quick like and subscribe really helps the channel grow. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Alright, get comfortable, let the lights dim, and just, relax. Let my voice guide you. This story, well, it still sends a shiver down my spine when I think about it. I still remember the first time I heard those footsteps. The heavy thud echoing in an otherwise silent corridor. My pulse, already hammering from the start, feeling that something wasn't right. I had chosen that tiny commercial room as my sanctuary, hoping to focus on my personal projects without the buzz of a busy office or the clamor of a shared workspace. The building itself was old, with a single flickering light outside by the parking lot. From the moment I walked in on my first evening, I felt an unsettling chill crawling across my skin. The hallway smelled of stale air and cleaning products, a stale mixture that did nothing to ease my unease. Even then, I dismissed it as first-day jitters, telling myself everything would feel normal once I settled into a routine. But normal never came. I had decided to sign the lease because the price was low, and the area was quiet. The landlord mentioned the building's age, but he insisted it was structurally sound, just in need of some interior renovations that might happen at an unspecified time. I found my room on the top floor, an isolated corner with a single rectangular window that overlooked a narrow street. During the day, daylight dribbled in, painting the floor with dusty beams of sunlight. At night, however, that window showed nothing but darkness, as if the world outside ceased to exist after sunset. There was a sensation of claustrophobic quiet, an almost tangible pressure that made me catch my breath whenever I looked outside, searching in vain for city lights. On my first night working late, I felt a curious mix of excitement and fear. The hallway was so dimly lit after a certain hour that it resembled a tunnel stretching into oblivion. I thought I heard something, a faint shuffle, perhaps someone else working on the same floor. But then I checked my watch, 9 p.m. The other tenants, who worked normal 9 to 5 schedules, had already gone home. The cleaning staff only came in the early morning. So, I was sure the building was empty except for me. I brushed aside the notion that I wasn't alone, chalking it up to the building's old air vents. Sometimes old infrastructure mimics footsteps or whispering voices, or so I tried to convince myself. By the end of that first week, I found it hard to ignore the footsteps. They had a deliberate cadence, like someone wearing leather-soled shoes. Each step tapping the floor with a purposeful weight. I'd glance at the clock, around 9 p.m., and feel my throat tighten as if anticipating the dreaded sound. The footsteps always began softly, a distant presence at the far end of the corridor. Then, they would come closer, more distinct. My heart would pound faster with each echo, my palms growing damp, breath catching in my chest. Eventually, they would pass right by my door, the steps reverberating against the walls, and fade into the blackness on the opposite side. Every time, I bolted upright in my chair, terrified of confronting whatever was outside. Yet, a strange, masochistic curiosity gnawed at me. I wanted to fling open that door and confirm there was nobody there. But for several nights, I just sat there, paralyzed, feeling my stomach twist in knots. One evening, my nerves had been gnawing at me all day. Deadlines loomed, and I was behind on a project. The entire building felt colder than usual, and I nearly jumped out of my skin each time the radiator clanked in the corner of my office. When the clock read 8:57 p.m., I stood up, my heart racing, determined not to let my fear overpower me. I reasoned that if there really was a person out there, I should be able to see them coming. So I waited, hand hovering over the doorknob like I was preparing to detonate a bomb. The footsteps started, as always, faint at first, gradually rising in volume. My breath turned shallow, and a film of cold sweat beaded on my forehead. My legs trembled like they might give out at any moment. When the steps sounded just beyond my door, I gritted my teeth, twisted the knob, and yanked the door open. Darkness. The corridor's overhead lights were off, leaving only a weak glow from the emergency sign at the far end of the hall. My first impression was that I was staring into a void, an impenetrable black. I tried blinking, hoping my eyes would adjust, but I couldn't see a single outline that resembled a human being. Yet the footsteps continued. I heard them, so close that it felt as though someone was brushing past me. My heart thundered. My head pounded with the rush of blood. My mouth went dry as I fought the urge to shout or run. I stood there, a pathetic statue of fear, unable to do anything but watch the empty black. Then the footsteps tapered away, as if moving around a corner that didn't physically exist, and I was left alone in silence. I must have stood there with the door open for a full minute before my senses returned. My hands shook when I finally closed the door, and for the rest of the night, I couldn't concentrate on my work. I kept replaying the moment in my head. There was no figure, no silhouette, no flicker of movement. Yet the sound was undeniable, as real as my own racing heartbeat. I considered the possibility that I was imagining things. Maybe stress was getting the better of me. Perhaps a psychological phenomenon, sometimes the brain hears what it fears the most. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. It felt too real. The following week, I tried to gather information in a subtle way. I asked the landlord if anyone else rented space on my floor and if they worked late. He shook his head and said no one else had renewed their lease on that wing of the building. Budgets were tight, and only I had shown any interest in that otherwise deserted corridor. He joked that I must enjoy solitude, to which I responded with a vague smile. I mentioned hearing some noises at night, but he only shrugged. He said old buildings make all kinds of sounds, and if I needed anything, I could call his emergency line. That conversation left me feeling uneasy. If the landlord himself had no explanation, then I was truly alone in this mystery. Night after night, the same experience repeated. Around 9 p.m., those footsteps manifested out of nowhere, echoing with that ominous, steady rhythm. My body reacted the same way every time. My pulse hammered, my breathing went ragged, and I had to wipe sweat from my brow. I tried turning on loud music, thinking maybe I could drown out the noises. It made no difference. Even over my headphones, I could detect those footsteps, reverberating as if the entire hallway were a drum. I tried leaving the door open at 8:45 p.m., lights on full, hoping that if I spotted something right away, it would resolve the situation. The footsteps still came, slicing through the silence, but no one ever appeared in the doorway. It felt like an invisible presence was crossing back and forth before my eyes. Over time, the atmosphere in my small office grew more oppressive. The overhead fluorescent lamp flickered sometimes, casting warped shadows along the walls. The radiator hissed at the strangest moments, releasing bursts of musty-smelling heat that made me sweat, even though the rest of the space was oddly cold. I felt as if the walls were closing in on me. My reflection in the dark window became a blurry reminder of how unsettled I was. On some nights, I thought I saw the faint shape of a silhouette behind me in the reflection, but whenever I turned around, the office was empty. The fear began to gnaw at me so relentlessly that I started to question my reality. Was my mind conjuring illusions? Was I losing track of what was real? I attempted to reassure myself. Perhaps this was just an elaborate trick of an overworked brain, or maybe there was a structural quirk in the building's design causing the acoustics to mimic footsteps. But my rational excuses started to crumble when I felt the vibrations through the floor. One night, after hearing the steps outside, I crouched near the door and pressed my palm against the cold tile. Each footfall sent a faint tremor into my hand, a real physical movement. It felt unshakably present. I jerked my hand away, heart in my throat, realizing that no hallucination would generate that kind of vibration. That moment pushed my paranoia to a new height. I started dreading evenings, watching the clock with a sense of impending doom. Even earlier in the day, I'd catch myself flinching at random sounds, a door creaking elsewhere in the building, a distant honk from the street, or the hum of the ancient ventilation system. My muscles tensed involuntarily, my jaw remained clenched, and I developed a near-constant tension headache. Any conversation I had with friends or colleagues about my new workspace occurred indirectly. I'd vaguely say that the building was creepy or unsettling, but I never confessed the full extent of my fears. I worried they'd label me paranoid or delusional. Eventually, my work suffered so badly that I realized I had to confront whatever was lurking in that corridor. On a Thursday night, I steeled my nerves and devised a plan. I'd arrive just before dusk, set up a camera to record audio and video from the corridor, and keep every single light on. If there was an explanation, an intruder or a misfiring system, I would catch it. That evening, the building felt more sinister than ever. Even the elevator ride was unnerving, its fluorescent bulb flickering just enough to throw my pulse into overdrive. Once I reached my floor, I installed the camera in front of my door, angling it to capture the entire length of the corridor. Then I retreated into my office, forcing myself to breathe slowly. When 9 p.m. approached, I positioned myself behind my door, ready to pop out at the slightest sound. The footsteps began like clockwork, a distant knocking on the far side of the corridor. My heartbeat thundered in response, and I felt my breath stick in my throat. This time, I forced my legs to move. I swung the door open while the footsteps were still reverberating. The corridor lay empty, though the footsteps continued, just a few feet away from me. It was as though an invisible figure marched in plain sight, defying any logic. My entire body went numb with terror. I reached out in the darkness, hand quivering, and felt nothing but cold air. And then, abruptly, the footsteps stopped, leaving me panting in the stillness. I examined the camera footage after my pulse settled somewhat. The hallway lights had flickered at the exact moment I heard the steps. The audio recorded the sound of footsteps, crisp and unambiguous. But the video showed no movement, no shape. It looked as if I had opened the door to chase empty shadows. That final piece of evidence was the tipping point. I felt a wave of raw dread, more potent than anything I'd experienced before. The building was either haunted or messing with my senses in a way I couldn't endure. My mind reeled with the realization that there might be something beyond my rational understanding at work. I knew I had to leave. The feeling of being constantly observed, the thick dread in the halls, and the bizarre evidence on my recording all convinced me that my sanity was more valuable than any cheap rent or quiet working environment. I came in one last time during daylight hours to pack my things. Even then, the building exuded that icy aura. Every creak of the floor echoed like a warning. My chest felt heavy, and a sheen of perspiration dampened my collar. By the time I hauled my final box to the car, I was trembling so hard that I almost dropped it. I never found out what caused those footsteps. I never demanded an explanation from the landlord beyond what he could offer because I sensed it was an exercise in futility. Some occurrences defy rational explanation. I escaped that old commercial space with my work in shambles and my nights haunted by phantom echoes. Even now, whenever I pass by an empty corridor, my pulse quickens, a tiny part of me expects to hear that same firm, heavy tread. I can't shake the feeling that the presence in that hallway was something more than a mere quirk of an aging building. In the end, I fled from whatever walked those halls at night. Yet, a piece of my mind is forever trapped back there, listening, waiting, dreading that echo of impossibly real footsteps. And that final thought leaves me with a chill that no daylight can ever quite chase away. Title: The Echo at 3:17 a.m. Kwa rubbed his eyes, the blue light of the monitor painting exhaustion onto his face. It was nearing 2 a.m., but the project deadline hung over him like a guillotine. The apartment was oppressively silent, the usual city hum strangely absent, punctuated only by the occasional hiss of the old radiator. He needed to get out. Synergy Plaza was just 3 blocks away, a newly renovated public space with geometric concrete paths, stark modern sculptures, and bright, cold LED lighting. It was supposed to be safe, even this late. Kwa hoped the crisp air and a short walk would unscramble his overworked brain. As he stepped into the plaza, an unnatural quiet settled over him. No distant traffic, no wind rustling the sparse, strategically placed trees. Even the central fountain, usually a source of soothing white noise, was silent, likely down for maintenance. His footsteps echoed sharply on the concrete, each step bouncing back with a slight, unnerving delay, as if the sound traveled much farther than the surrounding buildings allowed. He dismissed it, an acoustic quirk of the plaza's design. He walked for about 10 minutes, the cool air filling his lungs, the tension in his shoulders starting to ease as he mentally rearranged lines of code. That's when he heard it again. Clearer this time. Not an echo. It was a second set of footsteps, directly behind him, maybe 20 feet back. Heavier than his own, yet perfectly matching his rhythm. Kwa stopped abruptly. The footsteps behind him continued for exactly 2 more beats, then stopped too. His heart hammered against his ribs. Slowly, he turned. The plaza was empty. Concrete paths gleamed dully under the cold LEDs. Not a soul in sight. Hello. His voice sounded thin, reedy in the vast stillness. Only silence answered. Stress, he told himself. Sleep deprivation can cause auditory hallucinations. He turned back, forcing himself to walk, ignoring the prickling unease crawling up his spine. The footsteps resumed, instantly synchronized with his. He slowed, they slowed. He sped up, they sped up. The distance remained constant. The feeling of being followed was undeniable now, chilling him to the bone. He spun around again, faster this time. Still nothing. But he noticed something else. The LED lamp post directly ahead seemed to dim slightly as he approached, then brighten back to normal once he passed. He backed up a few steps, testing it. The light dimmed again. It was as if something unseen moved between him and the light source, drawing its energy. Real panic began to set in. This wasn't a hallucination. He deliberately changed his gait, 3 quick steps, a pause, 2 slow steps. The footsteps behind him mimicked it perfectly, 3 quick, pause, 2 slow. But with that distinct, heavier timbre. The temperature plummeted. Kwa could see his breath misting in the November air. He felt an invisible gaze fixed on his back, intense and focused. "What do you want?" he whispered into the empty space. The response was immediate. An icy touch pressed between his shoulder blades, burning through his thin jacket. Cold that felt like fire. A strangled gasp tore from Kwa's throat as he bolted, sprinting towards the nearest exit. The footsteps behind him erupted, no longer mimicking but pursuing. They multiplied, 2 sets, then 3, then a cacophony of heavy, unseen feet pounding the concrete, closing in from all directions. The lights along his escape path flickered and died one by one as he neared them, plunging him into intermittent darkness. Something brushed against his back, cold and dry like a winter wind, though the air was still. He stumbled, catching himself before falling, his lungs screaming. The exit was just yards away. As he made a final, desperate dash, he felt something solid move directly in front of him, blocking his path, though he saw nothing there. He instinctively swerved, the sensation of passing through an invisible, substantial presence chilling him further. He burst out of the plaza, back onto the familiar city sidewalk. Instantly, everything stopped. The pursuing footsteps vanished. The oppressive pressure in the air dissipated. The streetlights shone with their normal, steady glow. He didn't stop running until he slammed his apartment door shut behind him, fumbling with the locks with trembling hands. He collapsed against the door, gasping for air, heart threatening to burst from his chest. Stress, he chanted silently, desperately. It had to be stress. The next night, Kwa locked his bedroom door, wedged a chair under the knob, and forced himself into bed early. Exhaustion warred with terror, but eventually, sleep claimed him. Until he was jolted awake. The digital clock on his nightstand glowed, 3:17 a.m. And then he heard it. Footsteps. Not the phantom echoes from the plaza. These were heavy. Deliberate. Resonating from the hallway inside his locked apartment. Right outside his bedroom door. Pacing back and forth. It had followed him home. The silence in the apartment was no longer empty. It was waiting. Just like the thing pacing outside his door. waiting for 3:17 a.m. tomorrow. Qua knew, with a certainty that turned his blood to ice, that this was only the beginning. The real horror was now inside with him. Okay, here is a long, scary ghost story in English, drawing inspiration from the tone and style of the stories you provided. The first time I walked up the overgrown path to Blackwood Manor, I told myself it was just another job. A bit unusual, maybe, cataloging the contents of a house left untouched for decades, but nothing I couldn't handle. The air hung heavy and still, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves, even though it was a clear autumn afternoon. The house itself loomed at the top of the low hill, windows like vacant eyes staring out from beneath a sagging roofline. Paint peeled from the dark wood in long strips, and ivy clawed its way up the stone foundations. I remember my hand hesitated on the large, cold iron knocker. That should have been my first warning. My name is Alastair Finch. I'm an archivist, mostly freelance, taking jobs wherever dusty documents and forgotten histories need sorting. This contract came through an old university contact. A distant relative of the Blackwood family wanted a preliminary inventory before deciding whether to sell the estate or level it. The pay was decent, and the isolation appealed to a quiet part of me. I was given a set of heavy keys, a map of the grounds that looked hand-drawn and faded, and a warning from the solicitor to stick to the main house and the library wing, the rest is structurally unsound. He'd added, almost as an afterthought, and don't mind the drafts. Old place. The front door groaned open onto a vast, shadowed foyer. Dust motes danced in the few shafts of light piercing the grimy windows. A grand staircase swept upwards into darkness, its banister thick with cobwebs. The silence was immediate and profound, broken only by the echo of my own footsteps on the marble floor. It felt colder inside than out, a deep, penetrating chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I set down my suitcase and survey kit, my breath misting slightly. My instructions were to start in the main library, located in the west wing. Finding it took longer than expected. The layout was a maze of hallways lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me. The air grew staler the deeper I went. Finally, I found the double doors, heavy oak carved with unfamiliar crests. One key turned the lock with a rusty screech. The library was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with books lined every wall, interrupted only by tall, arched windows draped in heavy, moth-eaten velvet. A massive fireplace dominated one end, cold and black. In the center, a long reading table was coated in a thick layer of gray dust, disturbed only by what looked like a single, clear handprint near the edge. My stomach gave a little lurch. I told myself it was probably from the solicitor or the last person who dared venture in here years ago. I set up my workspace on that table, laying out my laptop, camera, notebooks, and portable lamps. The existing wiring in the house was shot, so I relied on battery power. The first few hours were engrossing. The collection was eclectic, rare first editions, crumbling journals bound in leather, stacks of sheet music yellowed with age. I lost track of time, photographing spines, making notes, carefully turning brittle pages. It was late afternoon when the first odd thing happened. I heard a soft thump from the far end of the library, near a section filled with oversized atlases. I looked up, shining my flashlight beam down the long aisle. Nothing. Just towering shelves and deep shadows. I listened intently. Silence. I dismissed it, an old book settling, maybe a rat. I went back to work, but a knot of unease had tightened in my gut. As dusk began to creep through the grimy windows, the library grew darker, the shadows deepening and seeming to shift at the edge of my vision. My battery-powered lamps cast pools of stark white light, making the surrounding gloom feel even more oppressive. I heard it again, a distinct scrape, like a heavy chair being dragged across a wooden floor. But there were no chairs in that part of the library. I stood up, my heart thudding against my ribs. "Hello." I called out, my voice sounding thin and uncertain in the vast space. "Is anyone there?" The only reply was the echo of my own question fading into the stacks. I walked slowly towards the source of the sound, my flashlight beam cutting through the dust-filled air. The floorboards creaked under my weight. I reached the end of the aisle. Empty. No sign of disturbance. But the air here felt colder, stagnant. I shone the light upwards, along the towering shelves. A book near the top seemed slightly askew, protruding more than the others. Too high for me to reach easily. I forced myself back to the table, trying to focus. But the sounds continued, intermittently. A soft whisper that seemed to come from just over my shoulder, vanishing when I turned. The distinct sound of pages turning in a distant corner, though I was the only one there. Each noise frayed my nerves a little more. My skin prickled, and I kept glancing towards the darkest corners, half expecting to see something watching me. By the time true night fell, I was jumpy and exhausted. I decided to pack up and retreat to the small caretaker's cottage near the gate, which the solicitor had assured me had working plumbing and electricity. As I gathered my things, my flashlight beam swept across the long reading table again. My blood ran cold. Next to the first handprint, there was now a second one, smaller, almost childlike, perfectly formed in the dust. It hadn't been there an hour ago. I hadn't been anywhere near that end of the table. I backed away slowly, my breath catching in my throat. I grabbed my bags and practically ran from the library, fumbling with the key to lock the heavy doors behind me. The walk back through the dark, echoing hallways of the main house was torture. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle from behind the peeling wallpaper sounded like footsteps following me. The cottage was small and damp but felt blessedly normal compared to the manor. I made a simple meal, tried to read, but couldn't shake the image of that second handprint. Sleep was elusive. I kept hearing faint scratching sounds outside the cottage window, like fingernails on glass, but whenever I looked, there was nothing but the dark, skeletal branches of the trees swaying in the night breeze. The next day, I forced myself to return to the library. Sunlight, even filtered through dirty windows, made the room seem less menacing, though the chill remained. The table was as I'd left it, two handprints side by side in the dust. I took a photo, my hand trembling slightly. I tried to work, but my focus was shot. Every shadow seemed too deep, every silence too expectant. Around midday, I was examining a set of leather-bound ledgers when I felt it, a distinct, icy breath on the back of my neck. I froze, every muscle tensed. Slowly, deliberately, I turned around. Nothing. Empty air. But the feeling lingered, a cold patch on my skin, the hair on my arms standing on end. That was when I heard a child's giggle, soft and clear, echoing from the upper gallery that ringed the library. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The giggling stopped abruptly. I grabbed my most powerful flashlight and hurried to the narrow spiral staircase leading to the gallery. It was choked with cobwebs, and the steps felt unsteady. Reaching the top, I swept the beam across the dusty walkway. More bookshelves lined the walls up here, along with closed doors leading to what I assumed were studies or reading rooms. It was deserted. But near one of the doors, lying on the dusty floor, was a small, antique porcelain doll, its painted eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Its dress was torn, and one arm was missing. I hadn't noticed it yesterday. I backed away, my heart pounding like a drum. This wasn't settling noises or my imagination. Something was in this house, and it was interacting with me. I descended the stairs, never taking my eyes off the gallery railing, expecting to see a face peer down. I decided to investigate the history of the Blackwoods more thoroughly. Tucked away in a dusty alcove, I found a box of family papers, letters, diaries, old photographs. One diary, belonging to a governess from the late 19th century, caught my eye. Her entries started cheerfully but grew increasingly disturbed. It had a cavernous fireplace and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, mostly empty now save for a few forgotten volumes bound in decaying leather. It was here, late one evening, amidst the scratching of his pen and the rhythmic crash of waves below, that he first heard it. A whisper. It was faint, almost subliminal, like the rustle of dry leaves or the sigh of the wind through a keyhole. He paused, listening. Silence, save for the storm outside. He shrugged it off. Nerves. The power of suggestion fueled by the solicitor's tales. But it came again the next night. And the night after. Soft, sibilant, seeming to emanate from the very walls around him. It was impossible to make out words, just the sound of speech, hushed and secretive. He checked the windows, the chimney flue, the adjoining rooms. Nothing. He tried to focus on his work, but the whispering became a persistent, insidious distraction. Sometimes it sounded like a single voice, other times like multiple voices murmuring in concert. He started sleeping poorly, his dreams filled with shifting shadows and indistinct figures beckoning him from dark corners. One afternoon, exploring the neglected west wing, a place even the weak sunlight shunned, he found a locked door at the end of a long, dust-choked hallway. It wasn't on the house plans he possessed. Curiosity piqued, he fetched a set of old keys found in a desk drawer. After several tries, a heavy iron key turned the protesting lock. The room inside was small, clearly a nursery once. Peeling wallpaper depicted faded cherubs and lambs. A single rocking horse stood frozen mid-rock in the center, coated in a thick layer of dust. But it was the small, leather-bound diary lying on a child-sized desk that drew his attention. The handwriting was looping and childlike. It belonged to a girl named Clara, who, according to the dates, lived here over a century ago. Arthur sat on the dusty floor, carefully turning the brittle pages. October 12th, Papa says the noises are just the wind. But the wind doesn't whisper my name. October 19th, the whispering is louder now. It comes from the walls. It tells me secrets. October 25th, it says it's lonely. It wants a friend. November 3rd, it doesn't like Mama and Papa. It says they want to take me away. It promises to keep me safe here. Forever. November 10th, it's angry today. The whispers are sharp. They hurt my ears. It doesn't want me to leave this room. The entries became more erratic, filled with childish drawings of distorted figures with hollow eyes lurking behind the walls. The last entry was a single, frantic sentence, barely legible. It's coming out. A chill, colder than any draft he'd felt before, snaked up Arthur's spine. He slammed the diary shut, dust pluming around him. As he did, he heard it clearly for the first time, right beside his ear, a cold breath accompanying the sound. Stay. Arthur scrambled back, heart hammering against his ribs. He fled the room, slamming the door shut and locking it, fumbling with the key in his haste. He leaned against the corridor wall, gasping for air. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't his imagination. That night, the activity escalated. The whispers were no longer confined to his study or the west wing, they seemed to follow him, slithering from the plaster, echoing down the hallways. Doors he knew he'd closed were found open. Objects shifted position, a book moved from the table to the floor, a chair turned slightly to face him. He felt constantly watched, the oppressive weight of unseen eyes pressing down on him. Sleep became impossible. When he did drift off, nightmares plagued him, Clara's distorted drawings coming to life, whispering figures peeling themselves from the wallpaper, their fingers elongated and grasping. He began to see things in the periphery of his vision, fleeting movements, shadows that detached themselves from corners and flowed like liquid darkness. He considered leaving. Packing his bags, abandoning the book, the inheritance, everything. But a morbid curiosity, mingled with a historian's stubborn desire for answers, and perhaps a nascent, terrifying influence from the house itself, kept him rooted. Who was Clara? What had happened to her? What was the entity in the walls? He delved into the house's history with renewed urgency, spending hours in the dusty local archives. He found scattered references to the Holloway family, who had lived in Blackwood Manor in the late 19th century. They had a young daughter named Clara. The records abruptly stopped. There was no mention of them moving, no death certificates. They had simply vanished. Local folklore, the kind Arthur usually debunked, spoke of the house swallowing them. Armed with this grim knowledge, Arthur felt a growing dread. He wasn't just in a haunted house, he was in a place that consumed its inhabitants. The whispers grew bolder, clearer. Sometimes they sounded like Clara, pleading for help. Other times, a deeper, rasping voice spoke, ancient and malevolent, promising knowledge, power, company. We know your loneliness, Arthur. You seek stories, we have so many. Just listen, stay, become part of the walls. One stormy night, the wind battering the manor with gale force fury and rain lashing against the windows like frantic fingers, the power failed. Plunged into near-total darkness, armed only with a flickering candle, Arthur felt the true presence of the house awaken. The whispering was deafening now, a cacophony of voices swirling around him, seeming to physically press in on him. Cold spots moved, chasing him through the rooms. He heard heavy footsteps pacing the floor above him, then running down the main staircase. He saw it then, not clearly, never clearly, but a tall, impossibly thin shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness at the end of the hall, its form shifting and indistinct, stretching towards him. Panic seized him. He turned and ran, stumbling through the dark corridors, the candle flame dancing wildly, casting monstrous shadows. The whispers pursued him, clawing at his sanity. Don't leave us. Become one. He burst into his study, slamming the door and fumbling to lock it. He backed away, holding the candle aloft, his eyes darting around the room. The whispering was inside the room with him, coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. You belong here now, Arthur. The deep voice rasped, seeming to issue from the very stones of the fireplace. Then, the plaster on the wall beside the hearth began to crack. A fine web of fissures spread outwards, accompanied by a dry, scraping sound. Dust rained down. A section of the wall bulged, then crumbled inwards, revealing not brick or lath, but a cavity filled with suffocating darkness. From that void, the whispering intensified into a soul-chilling chorus. And Arthur felt, rather than saw, something begin to emerge, something ancient, formless, made of shadow and despair and the trapped essence of those who had come before. His rationality shattered. This was no legend, no psychological trick. It was real. It was hungry. With a strangled cry, Arthur threw his candle towards the emerging presence. It flared momentarily against the darkness before extinguishing, plunging the room into absolute blackness save for the wild lightning flashes outside. He didn't wait to see what happened. He wrenched the study door open and fled into the howling storm of the house. He didn't know how he made it out. He scrambled through hallways that seemed to shift and lengthen, past doors that opened and closed on their own, the cacophony of whispers chasing him like a physical force. He burst out the heavy front door into the raging storm, not stopping until he reached his car, parked some distance down the overgrown drive. He drove through the night, soaked and trembling, the whispers still echoing in his mind. He never looked back. Arthur Penhaligon never finished his book on local folklore. He moved far away, to a small, bright apartment in a busy city, always ensuring there was light and noise. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the city slept and a profound silence fell, he thought he could hear it, a faint, sibilant sound, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Or like a secret, being whispered just for him, from the memory of walls half a country away. He never felt truly alone again. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that Blackwood Manor still stood on its cliff, waiting, its walls patiently whispering, eager for the next listener. Story 1, The Echoes of St. Jude's Abandoned Hospital. Liam was an urban explorer, drawn to the skeletal remains of forgotten places. St. Jude's Hospital, closed for 30 years after funding dried up and whispers of malpractice grew too loud, was his Everest. Perched on a hill overlooking the town it once served, its broken windows stared like vacant eyes. Armed with flashlights, a camera, and a healthy dose of skepticism regarding the local ghost stories, Liam slipped through a gap in the boarded-up emergency entrance. The air inside was thick with the smell of decay, damp plaster, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. Silence pressed in, heavy and unnatural, broken only by the scuttling of unseen things and the drip of water somewhere deep within. He moved through the decaying lobby, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, illuminating overturned gurneys and scattered papers yellowed with age. He found the old operating theater first. Stainless steel tables gleamed unervingly clean under a layer of dust. Shadows clung to the corners, seeming deeper than they should be. He felt a prickling sensation on his neck, the distinct feeling of being watched. He snapped a few photos, the flash momentarily banishing the oppressive dark, but the feeling lingered. Deeper he went, into the patient wards. Rows of empty beds lined the corridors, rusted frames groaning under imagined weight. In one room, a child's faded drawing lay on the floor, a stick-figure family under a lopsided sun. In another, a single, worn leather slipper sat by the bedside, as if its owner had just stepped out. It was these small, human remnants that unnerved him more than the silence. Then he heard it, the faint, rhythmic squeak of rubber wheels on linoleum. He froze, flashlight beam aimed down the long, dark corridor. Nothing. He held his breath, listening. Squeak, squeak, squeak. It was getting closer. He backed slowly into a doorway, heart pounding. A rusted four-stand rolled slowly out of the darkness, moving with impossible purpose, before bumping gently against the opposite wall and stopping. Coincidence? A draft? But there was no air movement. He pushed onward, drawn by a morbid curiosity towards the psychiatric wing, notoriously the most feared part of St. Jude's. Here, the atmosphere thickened, growing colder. Padded cells lined one hallway, their heavy doors hanging open, revealing bare, stained walls. Scratches marred the inside of one door, deep gouges near the floor. It was in the common room of the psych ward that things truly unraveled. A flickering began at the edge of his vision. He turned his flashlight towards it, an old television set, screen cracked, suddenly displaying static. Then, a shape resolved within the snow, a distorted face, mouth open in a silent scream. Liam stumbled back, dropping his flashlight. It rolled, casting wild, dancing shadows. As he fumbled for it, he heard a whisper, right beside his ear, cold and dry, "Help me." He scrambled up, light back in hand, shining it wildly. The TV screen was dark again. But now, the room didn't feel empty. He saw movement, a fleeting shadow darting behind a pillar, the sway of a bare light bulb fixture that hadn't moved before. He heard shuffling feet, a low moan from one of the cells. He decided to leave. Enough was enough. But navigating the labyrinthine corridors in reverse proved difficult in his panicked state. He took a wrong turn, finding himself in the morgue. Stainless steel drawers lined the walls. One drawer was slightly ajar. Against his better judgment, he pulled it open. Empty. He let out a shaky breath of relief. Then, the drawer above it slid open silently on its own. And the one above that. One by one, the drawers opened, revealing their empty, shadowed depths. A wave of intense cold washed over him, carrying the scent of formaldehyde and something else, something rotten. He turned to run, but the heavy morgue door slammed shut with a deafening bang. He threw himself against it, but it wouldn't budge. Panic clawed at his throat. The whispers started again, swirling around him, dozens of voices overlapping, pleads, curses, cries of pain, the babble of the broken-minded. Shadows coalesced in the corners of the room, taking vaguely human shapes, their features indistinct but their eyes burning with cold, empty light. They drifted towards him, not walking, but floating, their spectral forms passing through the steel drawers. Liam pounded on the door, screaming until his voice was raw. The figures drew closer, their whispers intensifying, the cold becoming unbearable. He could feel their icy touch reaching for him, promising to make him another echo in the haunted halls of St. Jude's. Just as the first spectral hand brushed his cheek, the door behind him flew open, revealing the dark corridor beyond. He didn't hesitate. He bolted, not stopping, not looking back, until he burst out into the pre-dawn gray, collapsing onto the dew-soaked grass, the decaying scent of the hospital still clinging to him, the whispers forever etched into his memory. He never went urban exploring again. Underscore 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 underscore. Story 2, The Tithe of Oakhaven. Elara didn't believe in curses, but the village of Oakhaven tested her resolve. Nestled deep in an ancient, brooding forest, accessible only by a winding, single-lane road, it felt disconnected from the modern world. She was there researching local folklore for her thesis, specifically the legend of the Oakhaven Tithe. The villagers were polite but reserved, their eyes holding a watchful, weary quality. They spoke little of the tithe, dismissing it as an old wives' tale, a metaphor for hard winters. Yet, Elara noticed unsettling details: the heavy wooden shutters bolted tight every night, regardless of weather, the complete absence of dogs or cats in the village, the strange, carved symbols above every doorway, resembling intertwined branches forming a protective eye. Her host, the elderly town historian Mr. Abernathy, was more forthcoming, though his words were laced with caution. The tithe, he explained, his voice low, is an old pact. The forest provides good timber, plentiful game, fertile soil bordering its edges. But the forest, it demands a price. He wouldn't elaborate on the price, merely stating it ensured the village's prosperity and safety from what lies deep within the woods. As autumn deepened, the forest surrounding Oakhaven grew more imposing. The trees seemed darker, their branches more tangled, casting long, grasping shadows even at midday. A peculiar silence often fell, where even birdsong ceased. Elara felt constantly watched whenever she ventured near the tree-line. Sometimes, she thought she saw movement in the deep shadows, something large, hunched, and unnaturally still. One evening, walking back from the archives near dusk, she heard a rustling in the undergrowth just off the path. Thinking it an animal, she shone her flashlight towards the sound. 2 points of pale, phosphorescent light blinked back at her from the darkness, low to the ground, before vanishing. Not the eyes of any deer or fox she knew. A shiver traced its way down her spine. The night before the first frost, traditionally the night of the tithe according to the fragmented texts she'd found, the tension in Oakhaven became palpable. Every villager was indoors well before sunset. The silence was absolute, heavier than ever. Mr. Abernathy urged her to stay inside, double-check the locks, and ignore any sounds she might hear. Curiosity warred with a growing sense of dread. From her attic window, overlooking the village square and the edge of the forest beyond, Elara watched. Around midnight, under a sliver moon, a figure emerged from the largest house, the mayor's residence. It was a young man, no older than 20, pale and trembling. He walked slowly, deliberately, towards the forest edge. No one else emerged. No one stopped him. He reached the tree-line and stood there, head bowed. Elara strained her eyes, peering into the blackness of the woods. At first, there was nothing. Then, the shadows seemed to deepen, coalesce. Something immense shifted between the trees, a formless bulk that defied easy description, all tangled roots and moss and damp earth, vaguely humanoid but grotesquely large, with those same pale, luminous eyes she'd seen before. It moved with a slow, dragging gait, accompanied by the sound of cracking branches and sucking mud. It reached the young man, who didn't flinch. A long, root-like appendage extended, touching his shoulder. He shuddered violently, then seemed to deflate, collapsing into a heap. The creature lingered over him for a moment, then retreated back into the impenetrable darkness of the forest, leaving no trace except the still form on the ground. Elara stifled a scream, pressing her hand against her mouth. The tithe wasn't symbolic. It was a sacrifice. The next morning, the village was quiet, but the oppressive tension had lifted slightly. The young man's body was gone. No one spoke of him. It was as if he had never existed. When Elara, shaken, confronted Mr. Abernathy, his eyes were filled with a profound sadness. "It is the way," he whispered. "The pact must be honored."